Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and greetings and salutations to everybody. Thank you for joining us today on the Women of BSV. We have a AI-based interview today. So we have Konstantinos Sgantzos, who is a physicist and AI researcher, and we have Grigg, who is a financial cryptographer. And they are here to talk to us about a paper they've written, which is called Multiple Neighborhood Cellular Automata as a Mechanism for Creating an AGI on a Blockchain, which is a fascinating paper, which I did read today. I'm fascinated by it. So thank you very much for giving us your time and for joining us today. And I've got questions, but I know that Ruth is got quite a lot of questions. So I think we'll go with Ruth first because she's very excited to talk to both of you.
Chomping at the biscuit, yeah. Just want to echo, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I'm so thrilled when you said yes. So I love this paper. I like the fact that it's really quite wide-ranging and it's talking about topics that really interest me. Not that I've got any of your expertise on them, so I'm going to ask you probably a lot of dumb questions. But basically, I'd like us to sort of summarize what the paper is about. So multiple neighborhood cellular automata as a mechanism for creating an AGI on a blockchain. And I think that's an intriguing idea. What was the motivation for writing the paper? Is it just a subject that, needs to be talked about? Its time is coming?
Ian, will you start?
Me? Okay. I think the motivation for writing the paper was that it was a little bit of a leftover topic from a paper we had earlier written 2 or 3 years back, in that we're exploring how to put a artificial intelligence onto the blockchain. And we came up with a bunch of ways that could be considered. But out of that, we got talking a lot about the difference between AI and AGI, artificial intelligence versus artificial general intelligence, where the differentiating factor is AI can just do one thing, approximately one thing relatively well, whereas an AGI can do general things, which is to say it approximates ourselves. It can think and reason and emote and discuss and so forth, and approach a whole bunch of things, hopefully, or if you like, in simulcrum to ourselves, to imitate ourselves. So this is, of course, a hot topic. The notion that you can create an AGI is still very far away from us, because most of the things that we have created are extremely specialized and extremely limited, like picking cat pictures or drawing funny pictures according to a description. We've got quite advanced with that, but none of these things come close to actually thinking and breathing and working like an actual human. So the question was how to do that, and that was the motivation for the paper. I think maybe Kostas thinks different.
Well, yes. Basically, we started from implementing AI agents on the blockchain to see if the main thing here is that we need to signify that AI agents need to be, let's say, controlled in some kind of fashion, because it is a technology that is moving forward very fast, and the regulators have no idea what is coming. So apart from this, we noticed that a very good documenting tool for doing almost anything is the blockchain. Ian is the inventor of triple entry accounting. Triple entry accounting is, in essence, what is going on the blockchain as far as it concerns the logs and all the receipts that all the participants are going to create. And if you think about it, if we have the documentation, or if you prefer the paper trail of AI agents that are posed onto the blockchain, then we have a very good way to see what is doing what, which at this moment it is very difficult, not to say impossible, to say for any AI agent that is being used around the world. So The first part is the regulation that we need to take care. The second part is that the blockchain itself is a very good tool for keeping, let's say, real world data. So if, let's say, we have BSV as cash or any token that can represent, let's say, a digital euro or a digital United States dollar, then everything that is being transacted has already their receipts and a very good documentation on what it was going on with those transactions. Let's say that you bought a bottle of water or a coffee. Everything is labeled and everything is on the blockchain. We don't care about personal information, as Craig Wright says that it is separate from the blockchain. It is isolated from the blockchain. And we do care, though, for the real world data that is being stored there. And those data are the best place to start for training artificial intelligence. Because this is the most expensive thing that we have in AI field. We have to have those big data sets that are all labeled. And we need to train our models, our neural nets based on this labeled data. And this is a very expensive process because a lot of people are needed. And it's not always cat pictures, you know. We do have medical pictures, we have pictures that, or videos that are being trained right now, several neural nets. For automatic driving, for instance, Tesla has terabytes, not to say petabytes of data every day that they need to train constantly their AI in order to have self-driving. So I will pause here. And
it's hungry for data. Go on, Diddy. You
well, I have a question as well, because I was quite intrigued with the fact that actually you said AI probably should be renamed to analysis information. Is that right? Instead of actual artificial intelligence, because that's what it's doing. It's actually analyzing information. It's not actually an intelligence at the moment. So do you think that is something that would catch on in the industry, or is that just something between yourselves that you're kind of pointing out in this paper to distinguish between the two of them? Because AGI is a complete step in a future direction. Yeah.
Okay, I will try to explain in technical terms, but also I will try to simplify. Machine learning is nothing more than compression of data. Okay, we have huge amount of data, and then we compress all this data within a trained AI, a trained neural net. So this is basically analysis of information. The neural nets only look for patterns that they can recognize, and everything that we train them with is basically doing that. It's a funneling process. So it is analysis of information. And we prefer this term instead of intelligence, because if we look at intelligence, we cannot really understand what is going on. We cannot define intelligence in a matter that everybody agrees. So one other thing that is that we can discuss is also identity, where we have the same problem. And also consciousness, which is a similar problem. All of these terms and terminology is very hard to define, let's say. And we prefer that the analysis of information defines this work that we have done, and it's being done throughout the AI community as the best way to describe it.
It's important to sort of recognize that although we know a fair bit about ourselves and intelligence and so forth, what we don't really have is a good definition or test for intelligence. The best test we've had classically is called the Turing test. And that's quite a simple thing. It basically, if you can't tell the difference between something and something you know is intelligent, say a human, if you can't tell the difference between this bot and a human, then the bot is intelligent. And that's it's a test, but it's also a sort of slap in the face for actually understanding what is intelligence. So we have the difficulty that because we are talking about ourselves, we may never be able to understand ourselves. It's just, it faces reality limitations in that you can create a system to understand another system, but you can't create a system that's smart enough to understand itself. That requires a higher order, in which case we require a bigger machine. So we may never know what intelligence is. So when we talk about AI and analysis of information, we're also in a very gray area where fundamentally we don't know what we're talking about. We're just hoping to get closer and closer one day by some process or other.
Early on in the paper, you talk about neuromorphic computing, which is one of those phrases that I didn't hear, but now that I've heard it once, I'm seeing it everywhere.
Yeah.
So that seems to be a way of trying to construct chipsets that operate in a more brain-like way via, what would you call it? Neuron firing, essentially, bursts of energy rather than zeros and ones. Can you explain that for us?
Okay, neuromorphic computing is basically the representation of neurons that we have in our brain. And the idea is to construct structures that look like neurons and work like neurons within a specific chip. So in reality, what is happening here is basically designing a hardware neural net within a specific chip. So this also has pros and cons. That means that first off, you cannot really alter what you design, and it is being printed onto the chip. And but on the other hand, if you have determined what this neuromorphic chip is going to do, then you don't really care. So we just update the new version after 2 or 3 years, and you expand the capabilities and so forth. So the idea here is that most of the neuromorphic chips are based on the fact that they can calculate very fast, very difficult calculations that we need in AI. I believe that both of Intel and also Apple Silicon are using these kind of chips in their current hardware, which is something that is going to advance the AI field in the coming years. And this is why we are very concerned on to how fast we are going to get to the point that we will get something that is called in AI field as strong AI. Because right now we only have narrow AI. That is what Ian just described just before. So if we talk about something that is narrow, then it is focus specific. It's very, very simple, and you know how to deal with. We have plenty of those right now. So this paper is basically working on the hypothesis that if we construct a system that has many narrow AIs that are able to coexist within an environment that can work together towards a common goal, it is possible that we have something more complex. And this is what we call AGI, advanced, let's say, general intelligence, artificial general intelligence.
And greater than the sum of its parts, presumably. So from that perspective, it would be rather like humans working together in a society, but in this case it is neurons or nodes, in our case, working together, solving bigger problems. And what would you say, these are such difficult questions, but how would we measure whether we get the emergent phenomenon of consciousness or an AGI-like quality to it? How is there any way that we can know when that's occurred, other than it's just fantastic to use?
That's an excellent question, actually. And the idea of knowing is very difficult, because as Ian said a while ago, the Turing test, that is basically testing if a machine is, let's say, at the level of a human, or the human cannot really tell if behind the curtain there exists a machine, is not probably a test for the machine, but a test for the human.
Can I show this Fig 4 image, because this has got a beautiful, like, there's 3 images of the brain mapping. Can I show this at the moment? Because I think that would help to sort of visualize
tree-like structures.
So this is a representation of a human connectome. Images show the fiber architecture of a human brain as revealed by diffusion imaging on the left, a reconstructed structural brain network in the middle, and the location of the brain's core, which it says it's most highly and densely interconnected hub, which is on the right. So do you want to explain these then?
This is basically the neural net of the brain, and you can see all the neurons and axons and dendrites that are being, let's say, represented in this colorful image on the left. This is basically our brain when we think, let's say. When we discuss something, or we remember something, or we create something, several places of this topology are being lightened up, and they produce what we call the lightning of the brain, the neurons firing up, and this is not something that you can observe in a neuron only level. You can observe in a neighborhood level. That means that when we process information, it is not something that we can observe in only one place, but it happens all over our brain. Mm-hmm. It is pretty much fuzzy, and there's a lot of science behind the analysis of this kind of pattern recognition of how the brain works with EEG, fMRIs, and so forth.
Are they constantly making new connections as well? So they're constantly neurons are kind of growing and making new connections. Yeah. So
this is called neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, which is 2 different things that are being constantly changing within our brains. Literally speaking, every day that we live, we have a different brain, because we create new knowledge, we learn new things. Probably we have a trauma somewhere because of small hits or whatever, or maybe aging, and some parts of our brain are being shut down. So a lot of the information that we have in our brain is pretty fuzzy, and it is able to reform itself so that it can wire from a different, let's say, route instead of being static. And this is something that has been going on from the beginning of our lives up until we're very, very old, maybe 90 years old. We have observed that we can literally create new neurons. Neurogenesis is working up to our 90s. That means that a 90-year-old person is able to learn new things, which is fascinating. So the middle image is basically what we know as per what the different topologies of the brain is doing. So that is the visual cortex, there's the motor functions, and so forth. And the top right, it is how intensely interconnected it is. The right is the red image. Okay. How intensely interconnected is the brain. That means that where we have the most of the activity, which near amygdala and the places that we keep our memories and process information and so forth.
Yeah, I would just add that what we're looking at here is physical representations of the brain from the point of view of us trying to understand how to build an artificial brain. And if you look at the neuron, for example, there's been a lot of research in what a neuron was or is. And for a long time, we sort of believed that a neuron is just a simple switch. But as time goes on, we've discovered it's not a simple switch at all. It's a much more complicated thing. And if you go back to neural networks and so forth, they've built a simulation of neurons as simple switches, and they've layered it and so forth, and they've got some interesting results. But neurons are much more powerful than that. So there are other ways of looking at this whole problem, and looking at it from the point of view of deep investigations of biology is a bit too narrow. So one of the things we've done in the paper is we've said, well, okay, what are other ways to look at this problem? And to digress slightly, I did some work a while ago on a book that I called Identity Cycle, which is about literally how identity works and how we can build identity systems in a digital fashion. And one of the things that we discovered in that book is that if we go into the questions of identity and trust and so forth, there's a bit of a conundrum. And that is this, if you like, taking a particular thought experiment. If you start out with a baby of 0 days old, that baby is not intelligent. It doesn't have much capability to do much of anything other than scream and look for breasts, this sort of thing. It's very, very limited. But if you now think about ourselves, we are much more powerful. We can think, we can talk, we can reason, we can argue, we can emote, we can do all sorts of things. So if you think about what happened from day 0 of the baby's life up to our age, or let's say 20 years old, a whole lot of things happened to take that brain and turn it into a very powerful processing unit. And so if you look at the anthropology of that, what is happening is that the brain, which is essentially almost empty at day 0, is filled up with stuff over time. And that process is not what we're doing in AI.
No, you're not growing structures. And I guess in the brain, the actual structure itself is the processor. Yeah.
Well, you can analogize a brain as a processor, but it's just an analogy. And if you look at the way children grow up and so forth, the issue there is that, yes, you've got mother and father and so forth, but you've got a whole bunch of other people as well. So the child's growth and the child's reaching towards an intelligent adult is based on many, many people.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. My 7-year-old niece says all the people I know are inside my head, and so it's interesting you say that. So yeah. So I have a question though, because like a human brain has approximately 86 billion neurons. How many does a newborn baby have then? It's not 86 billion neurons, is it? Or is it? Or
the human brain is pretty much all formed at birth. It's very close. I mean, this is the problem with human biology. We are organized around the size of the child's brain. If you think about the parting, the giving birth and so forth, and the women's hips and all this sort of stuff, we have evolved to the point where we can't evolve much further without dramatic changes because the brain is so big. So this is, if you like, what makes us strong, and it also makes us very vulnerable. So children of the human species take 20 years to evolve to adulthood, whereas other species don't take anywhere near as long as that. Even the longer ones only take 2 or 3 years. So this process of time and information is very important. And this is, I think, being missed in the entire AI world. So we have gone into this paper thinking, okay, let's not just talk about one unit of processing, let's talk about dozens of units of processing. And the notion that, for example, okay, so humans have to be taught by elders. Why can't an AI be taught by elders, perhaps people, but also perhaps AIs? Will we have created artificial and general intelligence when we get to the point where one AGI can construct another AGI and teach it for several years or several minutes or whatever it takes to replace itself?
Do you think there's a bias in the actual teaching of the AI in the first place? I mean, that it's kind of in a lab, it's not taken out, say, into a field or a village in the middle of the Amazon, and you learn from, those experiences.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. You don't take an AI out into the garden and get it dirty. It's a complete focus on pure technocratic issues.
They're working on that, though, aren't they? With these neuromorphic chips, they're putting sensors on them so that they can actually, taste and smell and touch. So I think that they're working on it. That's the impression I get.
Right, but how far do you go when you're dealing with silicon? Because if you come back to these neurons, they can talk to each other, they can put out new connections to each other, and they do this in a sort of random fashion. And that is hard to do in silicon. We don't have a way to do that in silicon.
Weights, when you put weights on.
Yes, that's a software simulation, and once you get into the software, you're now slowing down dramatically.
Wait, how do you simulate a smell or a taste, as that? Because everybody must taste things differently and smell things differently. So, I mean, how many neurons at the moment is AI capable of doing? I think GPT-3. I'm not quite sure where GPT-3 is at the moment.
Well, I think that we have a GPT-4 now, but it is not released yet, and it's about 176 trillion of neurons.
Okay,
that's so bigger than the human brain.
That is basically representing the whole connectome, the whole synaptic tree of a human. If I recall correctly, I may not remember very well the number, but the gist of it is that we need to represent what the human brain does. So
that's approaching it, isn't it? That's approaching the power of the human brain, isn't it? When you're getting into trillions.
I'm not sure, because humans are not really, let's say, machines. We cannot really measure how the human brain processes the information. We know that we can do some deterministic stuff. Let's say we can calculate how much is 20 plus 20, but we mostly work on a stochastic way. That means that we are good at solving complex problems, not deterministic ones, while the machines are able to solve very easily the deterministic problems, and they usually are very bad at stochastic problems. This, of course, changes as the technology evolves. This is why the neuromorphic computers are coming into scene, and they are trying to tackle this problem. And this is why we believe that something like that will probably evolve to a strong AI, and we're not the only ones that we believe as such. And why should we put something like that on the blockchain? Because first off, you solve the bias problem. You really don't have somebody that will put the data in there, and those data will be biased because...
that's a really good point. If you've got a bunch of Nazis to feed it data, you might end up with something you don't want. Yeah.
So the second part is that with the diversity of the data that you have on the blockchain, you really have a representation of society. If you think about it, it is a representation of a country, probably, if they are using this payment system. And all of this is going to represent the real image of the society. And if we have multiple agents that are working together into this kind of information, then we have a more complex scheme that it really approaches the human topology of the brain. If it's going to be, let's say, more advanced than what we have now, that is very plausible. If it's going to have consciousness, we don't really care. I don't think that we can answer that question, and this is why we write in the paper that it is an undecidable problem. It is a mathematically undecidable problem, which has to do with the incompleteness theorem of Kurt Gödel and so forth.
Yeah,
that brings up so many questions with it being this like GPT-4, you say basically has as many kind of parameters as the brain has synapses at the moment then?
How many are there? Because I can't recall the number.
It's saying the brain has around 80 to 100 billion neurons, and GPT-3 has around 100 trillion is that right? Or does and around 100 trillion synapses, sorry. So 80 to 100 billion neurons and 100 trillion synapses. So GPT...
Trillion.
Yeah.
Parameters. Yeah.
So GPT-4 will be 500 times larger than GPT-3. So I'm not quite sure. But yeah, you said, I mean, right. The largest chip on the market is a wafer scale Engine 2. Is that what you use? It is 22 centimeters on each side and has 2.6 trillion transistors. In comparison, Tesla's brand new training tiles have 1.25 trillion transistors. So they're the chips that they're using for the GPT-4. So that's all right.
Well, another parameter here is how much would that cost for all these brain-like constructions to be able to do the machine learning. And right now, the GPT-3 costs for one run about 12 million United States dollar.
Okay.
That means that if you want to train it, it's going to cost you about 12 million.
How long is a run? I mean, what's the
what's it consist of?
What's the time frame on a run? Is that an hour? Is that like a 24 hours?
It depends on the data set, I believe. But right now we have several contraptions that stable diffusion and journey and so forth, which is basically cut down versions of GPT-3. And stable diffusion is able to be run onto your memory of your GPU. That means that you can literally run this model on your GPU. I mean, the things are getting advanced very, very fast, as you can witness yourself. And we are going to be in a place where we cannot really control all this infrastructure at the same time. And, having something stable as blockchain, which has the ability to record everything and keep log of everything, probably will make things much better for the human race, because we will be able to audit everything if something bad happens.
Yeah,
it's worth sort of observing how blockchain works. It's got this property whereby you're actually doing the transactions on the blockchain. And this is distinct from everything else we've done in the past, because in the past, what we would do is we would do physical transactions, if you like, and we would take records, but the records were, if you like, opinions of what happened. They weren't the fact of the transaction. Now with the blockchain, you can put the actual transaction onto the blockchain, and the fact of the transaction is right there. It is the record. So you've taken a situation where you've got a record of something happening, and then you've got an event, and now you've combined the two.
Yeah. They're one and the same.
They're one and the same. So now what you've done is you've eliminated bias, eliminated errors, eliminated deviations, fraud, etc., etc. Not completely, but you've now created data which is facts, as opposed to data which was opinions. And that gives a fairly large advantage for many things. But in terms of AI, what it means is we now have a much greater, shall we say, faith or confidence in our data set. We can take the data set that is sitting on the blockchain, and we can use that with much more confidence, because we know everything that happened on the blockchain. Somebody spent some money on it, so that was important. And that represents something that happened. And it is the something that happened. It's not some report, some third party, blah, blah, blah. So AI, for example, could find a quite serious benefit in that.
It could solve a hell of a lot of problems. From propaganda to,
the notion that you have these AIs, which, you can't really control. How are we going to control an AI? We can't even understand what the hell's going on. If you can checkpoint the data onto the blockchain, you can at least follow the stages as it's moving through its decision processing. If you think about a checkpoint going onto the blockchain every block, then you can follow the trail of what this thing is doing. And when you get to the particular decision, you want to know why it did that. You can break it down to its intermediate steps and come up with a bit more view. So you're able to, if you like, audit and control an AI engine in a fairly sophisticated manner by doing that. And not only that, it's publicly transparent. So if you've got some sort of AI that's working for some public good, if you consider government work or voting or something like that, then your AI could more conceivably be controlled and audited for something that was of public importance.
And presumably be accessed by paying it Bitcoin.
Yes, if the model is sitting there on the blockchain, you would be able to pay Bitcoin to it to move it from one state to the next. Give it more information, ask it questions, etc., etc.
So it could be more egalitarian in that sense.
Yes. Now this is a thing, and this is positive and so forth, but it's not universally good. There are difficulties with this process, because you could imagine that if the blockchain can't be stopped, and the AI becomes too powerful and starts to direct us, and how are we going to stop it if it keeps getting better and better?
We can't switch the electricity off, because we're all dependent on it. Yes.
So there's a lot of, if you like, concern or caution as to how big these things can get, and can they get big enough and fast enough and confident enough to start directing us in ways which aren't necessarily in our interests.
How are the regulators going to actually regulate this then? I mean, that seems to me as though it's quite a hard job, because if AI starts teaching itself, how can...
They're going to be left in the dust, aren't they?
Yeah. There are a lot of people thinking about this problem, and they're trying to work out ways to do it. I think the key thing here is to remember how humanity works. And if you think about other things of concern, such as animals, cars, rockets, whatever, there's always a human behind that particular device. If you think about a horse always has an owner. If you think about a car, there's always a registered owner, etc., etc. So if something goes wrong, then the owner is held to account. The car isn't held to account. The horse isn't held to account.
Don't you think very quickly, though, that they're going to be saying, it's the AI, we've got no control over it?
Right. So now you have an interesting conundrum with the blockchain, in that you could have an AI with no owner.
Mm-hmm.
Well, somebody decided to build the very first one, if you think about it. So,
well, yes, but that's kind of innocent, because the very first one probably doesn't know anything. It's only later, with the input of everybody building it up, if you're like the Nazis coming along to teach it how to be a troll, that sort of thing.
That presumes that the AI is somehow sentient, which is something that we don't know, right? So for something like that is probably, a little bit too stretched.
I don't think it necessarily has to be sentient to be problematic, though.
That's right.
I think because the Google one, wasn't it? DeepMind or something, didn't it? There was a gentleman that got sacked, wasn't there? Because he said it was sentient. I see that is a problem if AI actually thinks it's sentient and it's not sentient. It's like how would AI know if it's sentient if it's only had a biased input as well? To me, organic life, like how is it going to kind of understand how a frog thinks? It can't be that sentient kind of thing.
And that comes back to the question: what is sentience? If you want to test it, you have to know what it is, and we don't know what it is ourselves. We know that we're sentient, we just don't know what that means.
Yeah, and I know I can put a command prompt into Midjourney and go, give me a picture of a sentient being, and it will give me what it conceives to be a sentient being. But whether that is or not is another matter, like you say. It's interesting as well, because this does go very much into Blade Runner territory, and you did actually mention Blade Runner within the paper as well, which I was quite about, because it's such a brilliant film, but it does show a very kind of dystopian kind of future with AI and the problems with AI, even though, even the Rutger Hauer character at the end, they have feelings, they have empathy, they can, it's like, but he still can be turned off at some point. So interesting. I do feel the AI teaching AI is an interesting concept, because then who is the owner of that? Does the AI own the AI that it's just trained?
Some of which were explored in the recent film, the
Yeah.
2049 or whatever it was called.
The Ryan
Gosling.
Yes, Ryan. Yeah.
Yeah, really good. And I mean, did you see that Ex Machina film? I thought that was really fascinating as well, where the AI, well, the robot at the end, left and was keen to see the outside world, and trapped the guy in with no, had no actual empathy for him. Could simulate it well enough.
Mm.
You kind of mentioned Her. I think it was Costas that mentioned. Did you mention the film Her, which is the one with Joaquin Phoenix? Yeah, and there again, the AI all get together and they kind of dump on the humans, and they go off and do their own thing and say, you can catch up with us when you're conscious enough. It's that kind of thing. But then on the other side of things, I'm quite interested about this one as well, is because it's very Tronish, but it's a movie called Transcendence, which is with Johnny Depp, and that goes a step further, where I think his wife actually dies and he brings her to life as a kind of bot that speaks, and then he actually himself transcends into the neural network of the AI. It's so mind-blowing stuff, but I can imagine
Lawnmower Man.
there in
That's my reference point.
Well, we are in this place of time and space where our fantasies are becoming reality faster and faster.
Yeah.
So what we write in this paper is probably not far away, and even if there are skeptics on this kind of, let's say, estimation that we will not have an AGI anytime soon, if you think about it, we can have something that looks like, and we will never know.
Well, Sophia, the robot Sophia, is I can't remember, Ben, whatever his name is. I mean, is she using GPT-4 kind of technology, like 100 trillion parameters? No, okay. Because that would be quite interesting to see the robot with the GPT-4.
I think they didn't they just announce like yesterday that they were doing that. They were putting.
Yeah, I think that something like that is already being done. I pasted the link to Ian, I think, earlier.
So just to get back away from the sort of sci-fi worries and back to the kind of the benefits of it being on Bitcoin, as I see it, are sort of energy efficiency. I mean, that's the whole idea of getting closer to the way the brain works, is because the brain's so energy efficient, isn't it? And then the small world network of Bitcoin is actually very efficient as well. And then the security aspect as well, that it's unhackable.
Yeah.
Well, quite unhackable. What other advantages are there for running this AI on Bitcoin, do you think? Pseudonymity, is that a good thing? Does that keep us within the privacy laws?
Well, privacy is a big issue, because most of the stuff that's done on the blockchain is completely transparent to everybody. So it's not a good place to put your identity information, for example. And it's not a good place to put your secret cash purchases. It's not smart to buy drugs on the blockchain.
No.
So the privacy is a very difficult issue, and it's hard to come up with a system that integrates the two together without leaving trails which can be followed by investigators and so forth, or general bad people looking to scam you in some fashion or other. So it's certainly an issue.
But the fact that it has got this firewalled identity away from the data itself, in a sense, makes it quite a useful place to get your data from, do you think? But, because it's not breaching any privacy laws.
Well, you've got to be a little bit careful there, because there's always a core sitting somewhere that unravels all that information. Now, if that gets hacked, for example, you've got the indexing and so forth that now allows you to unravel everything on the blockchain and create a complete picture.
You think an AI could maybe do that? This is probably the perfect
it could certainly play a part.
Yeah.
It could play a part in that. And if you think about your devices and so forth, we all carry our little phones around, which means that we can now be, if you like, attacked on that basis. And the attack might be a simple robbery, it might be a hack, it might be an ambitious policeman who orders the phone to be unlocked and then reads everything off. It could be all sorts of corrupt things. So concentrating all that information and putting parts of it on the blockchain is actually a danger, even though you've got cryptography. The cryptography works now, but it's brittle, because when you do get a break, you tend to break the whole lot, and the whole thing comes open, and now you've gone from a position of supposed privacy to complete transparency. Whereas in real life, in our normal daily affairs, there isn't much that can happen that can do that to us. Because, for example, even if somebody comes and searches your house, they can't find all your papers so easily. They can't assemble them so easily. They can't read them so easily. So it's a danger as well as a benefit.
Still some advantage to living off-grid, offline.
Yes.
Yeah, paper and so on. Yeah. It's a strange world. Do you think maybe this is the singularity we're entering into?
Not yet.
I'll leave that one to Kostas. He's the science fiction novelist between us.
It sure feels like it to me.
Well, the singularity is something that everybody praises for. I think that several great thinkers, among them Kurzweil, I think, is aiming for that for the last 10 years. Reminds me of how fast we can have a fusion reactor. And the answer is always, it's only 30 years away.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's like soon. It's always soon.
Not got down to 5 years away yet. Good grief. Yeah.
It's interesting you say about singularity, though, because that is a Native American concept from like ancient.
Is it?
Yeah, it is.
I will really almost. I will really try to approach this in a more serious manner. The singularity will probably come at some point where, and if you check all the progress that is being happening throughout humanity, it is not a linear process. It is an exponential curve. So at some point, if let's say we reach at some point that the curve is starting to climb very, very quickly, we cannot really control the progress. And if we think that we exist in this planet for, let's say, the documented history is what, 5,000 years old? Maybe we exist 500 years old, 500,000 years old. And we are only a fraction of a second in the clock of the planet. So probably we are close to what we call singularity, but we can never tell until it happens. So it's something that will happen instantaneously, let's say, at some point, and the progress that we observe around us will be such a big deal and so fast, and will happen so fast that we cannot really understand it and cope with it. And I think that we are far away from that. Maybe if I could make a prediction, I would say probably 1,000 years away.
Years away. Oh God, no.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting concept, really, because like when you think about, as you said, about humanity, like 500 years, 5,000 years, 500,000 years. I mean, archaeologists are still finding, schools and things of Homo sapien relatives of Denisovans or whatever they are, from about 300,000 years ago. And these are new discoveries now anyway, and coming with like Göbekli Tepe, which is like a 12,000-year-old structure, which we didn't know about, say, 40, 50 years ago. So we are constantly rediscovering things about our own humanity that we weren't aware of before. So, if we carry on finding new finds like that, then yeah, I can believe that it maybe take 500 to 1,000 years, because constantly we're discovering new things. And the James Webb Telescope, for example, before we had Kepler. But look at the difference with the photos now that are coming back to us with the James Webb Telescope, and we can see so much more and understand so much more just because of the clarity of things. So is it the fact that it will keep going back and then reteaching itself because it's learned new stuff? we've learned new things to be able to feed it, and then it has to go back and analyze what it already knows to actually educate itself even further.
Well, I am terrible in my predictions, I can tell you as much, so that might be much faster.
10 years.
It feels like it's going to happen next week to me. I mean,
the
the
fact
algorithms are developing. Like Diddy and I are both on Midjourney and OpenAI, and I'm just watching the developments from day to day, let alone week to week.
Yeah, I mean,
incredible.
I do have a very conflicted opinion about Midjourney, because I am an artist anyway, and I do draw, and I'm drawing a portrait at the moment, which is a pencil portrait, and it's taken me days, but I really love the kind of just feeling pen on paper and being able to do and experience that, and actually just the whole process of being able to physically make a blank piece of paper into something. But with Midjourney, it's like I love it, but all I'm doing is giving it a little prompt, a command, and there it goes. It's like, wow, this is amazing. And I do have this real
Can I ask you something? Do you see Midjourney as a tool, as you see, let's say, your canvas?
I do.
You see, I don't know yet. I don't know yet, because I am a painter on canvas and a drawer on paper. So I'm having a real conflict with.
And I am not. I'm a graphic designer, and I've always used a computer to do design work. So for me, I just love it. I love it.
So
I don't nothing bad to say about it.
I asked Didi because she's an artist and she draws stuff, and I want to know how does it feels to have.
It makes me feel sad. I will tell you the truth. It makes me feel sad in the respect that, for example, someone who has no disrespect to anybody, but someone who has a real talent, who can take a blank piece of paper and draw something that looks phenomenal. That's a real talent. But then just putting a few prompts into an AI and taking all of that ability away from someone and just doing it on AI, it kind of does make me feel sad. But it also makes me feel excited. But it does make me feel more sad than excited, because you might not have any artistic ability whatsoever, and you just can write a prompt and you could make loads of money. Whereas this person who has a real talent is not going to make a penny, because it's taken them 3 days to draw a portrait, and who wants to buy a portrait when you can take 5 seconds or 10 seconds to come out with a beautiful image and just sell it straight away on the net. So I do have and the other thing about Midjourney I have a real issue with is it doesn't recognize, it recognizes girl, female, lady, but it doesn't recognize woman, and I'm no word of a lie, and it also cannot draw a horse. So I know it can draw other animals at the moment.
I got a reasonable horse article today, Diddy.
So I do have a few, but
it's getting there, Diddy. It's getting there. Like, it couldn't do it last week, but this week it can.
Like I say, so this is my conflict with it. Is, it's like a stonemason, a real amazing stonemason who can, over old cathedrals and stuff, the gargoyles. People might not like what they look like, but you think about the amount of time that's taken to actually someone physically make that, and then it's all being replaced by robots or AI. It kind of, I do have a real conflict with it.
But the notion of art is what the artist creates, and the artist has to imbue the art into the creation.
No, I
interpret the art.
And
now an AI doesn't do that. It's not creating art. It's just creating pretty pictures, which are amusing and fun and so forth. But the art is the message of the artist, and without the artist, you have no message.
Maybe. I mean, I agree with you in principle, Ian, but at the same time, though, I am astonished at how creative it is. Like, you wouldn't think of an AI as being creative, but I can't deny it's creative.
I asked it, how do you see? Yeah. And it came back with what it saw, because I was fascinated to kind of see whether or not it came back with anything at all. Was it going to be a blank color? Was it going to just be anything? And it was beautiful what it could see, and it was a lot of colors and things. But this is how do you see God, or how do you see a sentient being, or how do you see, well, just how do you see, you know? And I was very interested in that concept, but like I say, yeah.
But fundamentally, you know, you can model this thing by saying it's just a program that Googles that particular thing and finds all the images that look like that and creates a composite of it.
It's not really a composite, though, I don't think. I don't think it's a composite.
It's not a composite, but it's an abstraction.
Yeah.
Of some sense. It takes all the images of how do you see and just basically comes up with something that looks like vaguely one of them.
I mean, because I also thought that, I mean, obviously it's trolling through the net to find images, and it comes, and it is so quick, it's just unbelievable. So I asked it to, like, you know, a picture of Johnny Depp to just see how accurate that would be, King Charles III. And it was very accurate indeed with what it came back with, you know.
Yeah.
And just by the way, last week it didn't know who Dr. Craig S. Wright was. This week it does.
Okay. See the quick.
That's an advance, or does that help us?
Well, it doesn't help us, no. But I was creating some pictures because I was watching the trial this week, and you know, I like to amuse myself. So, but yeah, I'm astonished at it's just the speed of change with it.
Yeah.
Blowing my
mind. I suppose that's the thing, they can learn very quickly, and probably quicker than a human at the moment. Then in that respect,
probably quicker than human, like times, you know, 1,000,000. But you know, then we've still got the superior processing power. But how long for?
Well, with GPT-4, not that long, surely.
Well, you could also ask. Has an AI of any form created a good cartoon yet?
Oh, have you not seen the films? The films, though, I mean, AI can write films. They're quite very abstract sense of humor, but it can write a script for a 10-minute film that then you get actors to act out.
Let me stop you right there, because we wrote in the paper, and there is a proof about this. There is always a ceiling in what the AI can do. That means that you have a data set that you feed it inside, and it learns from that data set, and the data set is only based on humans. Think about it. I asked you because this is something that is very crucial, and it is very, very important that we write in that paper, that no matter how advanced an AGI will be, it will always have a ceiling as far as it concerns the creativity and what it can create. Behind that, there is always a data set that is being created by humans, and that data set is telling the AI what to do. So we are talking about a tool, if you think about it, and not a sentient machine or something.
What about pattern recognition, though? Isn't that transcendent? Will that not lead to discoveries?
Yeah, pattern recognition is basically what it does. When we have a lot of data that has, let's say, cat pictures inside or dog pictures, it will be able to tell if there is a dog inside the picture. But what happens if all the dogs in the world stop being printed on the internet or in the data set? And suddenly a new kind of dog emerges from nature. And this dog is not there. That AI will not have the information, because we're talking about machine learning here.
Yeah.
So
it's quite happy to put together concepts that of things that don't exist there. It's very good.
This is what we were saying earlier, though, about new discoveries that are being found all the time. You don't know what's in the Mariana Trench. You know, there are sea creatures that we've never seen before that we're getting images of, you know? So how can AI know that when we don't even know that ourselves? I see where you're coming from.
It doesn't. And it will not. So if we look at the incentives, which is something that is yet again a mathematically undecidable problem, if machines will get incentives on doing stuff, because it is very important. I don't think that they will ever have this ability of creating incentive. Or if we ever have a machine with an incentive, then the incentive is to keep humans alive, because this is a source of information.
Mm-hmm. And it needs us to feed it the information.
There you go.
Okay. Okay. I have you mentioned S script as well. Now I love Xiaowei. So how does talk about S script within the realms
He's
of
talking
AI?
about perceptrons, isn't he? Stateful contracts.
Well, this is a stateful contract that we did as a proof of concept in terms of putting an agent on the blockchain. Xiaohui is also a very, very good programmer and had created several other stuff, among them Game of Life, and recently I've seen a deep neural network that he coded that is being able to, let's say, do more complex stuff like pattern recognition or writing, handwriting recognition, and so forth.
Was that the transpiler? Was that an AI?
Excuse me?
The transpiler he wrote, was that an AI? Do we know?
No. Transpiler is something else that is basically taking his code and transforms it into the fourth variant that Bitcoin script is using. Basically, S-script from Xiaohui is a very down-to-earth way to start programming stuff that can work on the Bitcoin blockchain.
I thought it was a nice idea, this idea of a stateful contract. And I mean, the way I think of the brain is it's I don't know, I might be wrong, but it seems like a state machine. Like as we get older, it's harder to force it into the state of whatever memory we're trying to access.
Bitcoin is basically a multiple stateful machine. If you think about it, even the blockchain is a Turing tape, okay? And it has the ability of basic computation. And it can even do loops according to, very, very, let's say, slowly, but it can do basic computation. And the UTXO system is also a computation system. So if you think about it, this is a computational platform. It is a computer, basically. Mm-hmm. So you can program anything that you like. It is Turing complete, multiple ways Turing complete.
Mm-hmm. It's begging for an AI, really.
And there's been a debate since forever.
Yeah.
So will it make? I mean, are there going to be new kind of jobs opening up then, and new avenues that are, that people are going to be, just new positions for people to kind of work on AI with?
Yeah.
Whole new industries.
Definitely, because I think that blockchain will probably democratize the market of the AI agents, so that if you build something that it is useful, then somebody else will want to use it for a fraction of a cent, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're talking about microtransactions here. Nothing will stop existing. I have this discussion with a friend, and he said that we will lose open source. No, we will not, because open source is basically open access of something, right? And if I write code and I want to give it to the community, and it costs a fraction of a cent, then it is open source. You only need somebody and say, give me 10 cents, and this is it. I have access to that. So this is something that I have discussed a lot with some friends of mine, and I always argue in that this is going to be a payment-only system. No, it is going to be open access for everybody, and this is the ultimate open access system, because everybody can see that, everybody can pass, everybody can use whatever it is on chain. And if you have, let's say, a good programmer, this programmer, if he has or she has a good idea, then he can make a fortune by placing this program on chain. Mm-hmm. And, having the synergy of those programs, not necessarily on their own, but coordinated synergy. Let's say, trying to find a disease that you may have by, let's say, running a program and uploading blood analysis, let's say, or having a possible first opinion before going to your doctor. This is stuff that we already have. It is already out there, but it is not very accessible.
Yeah, we are still waiting to get an appropriately rich layer of tools and so forth to be able to work at a higher level, because the vast majority of people can't cope with the technical expertise needed to write smart contracts and put together the various wonderful things in financial cryptography. They're too complex. So we've had to have, if you like, a pause while the tools are built, such as Zhao programs, and you might recall the Solidity language from Ethereum and things like that. As we get higher up to layers of abstraction, we can now bring in many more people to work on those particular
Some people
tools.
like me can actually create software for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Get that.
So we're still waiting for tooling that allows us to do that.
I think that it's really worth it to mention that at some point the tools for authoring programs will probably follow the way of Midjourney and GPT-3 and DALL-E and all these neural nets. That means that what if we had an agent that we could train it with the GitHub code? So if this agent can understand the prompt that we're going to give it, then why not authoring a program for us? So
I did actually use OpenAI to write some JavaScript for me on a couple of occasions already. Yeah.
There you go. So the tools are already there. We just want to wait to get it more advanced.
Yeah.
So I think that it's going to be a bright future for this kind of stuff.
Prompt crafting will be a job.
Yeah.
That could be cool. Prompt crafting. I like the idea of that. What I do have a question, because I mean this is probably I always wonder about the 37% of people in the world that actually don't have internet access. Do you think that when they do eventually get internet access, that this is going to be a real kind of brain melt, head mess kind of thing for them to be able to get their heads around? I mean, I know it's a bit of a weird question, an open-ended question, but I always like 37%, about 2.9 billion people. It's a lot of people, and it's a lot of learning for AI to actually do as well from those people.
Well, typically, what you find is that the children will pick it up, and the older generations will fade away.
Well,
so it isn't really a brain dump. It isn't really a brain melt.
I think that Ian is right, but also we have a lot of people that are now, let's say, without even a phone in their hands, right?
Yeah.
Humans are very capable of learning. So I explained earlier that neurogenesis is an active process as we live and as we age, it never stops. So we have to just learn new stuff. What we're going to see is probably a Cambrian explosion of new programs and new ideas. If you prefer it, it's going to be a very big explosion of creativity from people that had totally different world view than what we have right now. So giving them the tools to do new stuff, then this will bring a huge amount of opportunities for everybody, even us, not only.
And here's an economic question. Do you think that Cambrian explosion of creativity and ideas and progress is enough to offset the financial crisis the world's suffering at the minute?
That would be Ian to answer.
Yeah, it's definitely an Ian question there.
No, I think we have to go through our financial crisis. We have to, learn to love recession. Technology isn't going to save us from that. And actually, the sort of technologies we need for that to affect that situation are more to do with energy and supply than actual information and communication and so forth. Because,
having said that, though, if we could get these neuromorphic computing up to speed, and get to function at the same levels as the brain, you know, the very tiny energy use, then maybe the energy crisis won't be such a problem.
Well, the energy crisis is a problem because we want to be warm in winter and we want the machines to run. Yeah, so
we
all of the physical stuff.
CPU, warming our hands on it now.
Yeah. You could probably do it with a Bitcoin mining machine, but it's too noisy to actually run comfortably. But
I worry a little bit that we're dedicating our energy to computers instead of people at the minute.
Certainly, there's a big move, or there has been a big move over the last several years to move to green supplies of energy for Bitcoin mining. It's still an opportunity cost, though. It's still the situation whereby that energy could be used for something better. And as the squeeze gets on, we might find that there's a lot of pressure to shut down a lot of the energy, the Bitcoin mining farms, especially in areas where they're facing rolling blackouts and so forth. So, yes, that's an interesting question coming.
Yeah, it's worth saying that a lot of the Bitcoin mining farms are in places where they're using energy created on the spot, aren't they? It's not necessarily taking away from,
Well, yeah, a lot of them are sort of based in hydro regions such as Norway and Scandinavia and so forth. But even there, they're suffering because they haven't had as much water as in previous years. So they're not generating as much energy. So there's pressure on again. So it's, it's not looking good for that sort of equation. We might be compressed greatly in our ability to use energy to power the proof of work blockchains, which is an interesting political discussion, of course.
Mm-hmm. Having said that, as well, it's worth mentioning BSV, big blocks, much more efficient energy usage than BTC
Well, it is the most eco-friendly blockchain that's out there. We know that for a fact, don't we? Because the stats and the information and the graphs and all the evidence is out there that it is actually the most ecologically.
I would say that if you're going to use proof of work, you should be damn well careful to be very efficient and make the best use of this tremendous energy that you're going to be consuming. Otherwise, it's just you're being a bit ridiculous, I think.
Definitely. So let's wrap this up then. Any final thoughts from either of you about anything you like? With regard to AI, where the world's going, what you're interested to look into next?
Might take a few more podcasts.
Welcome back anytime, certainly. It's a very interesting conversation.
Well, I will try to sum up what I expect for the next, let's say, couple of years. We have been contacted by some academics that they want these ideas to be tested on the field. That means that we're probably are going to employ some people, very talented people, to try and see if all of this that we thought is going to work. And the good thing is that we have a very good idea how this is going to let's say, produce some kind of results that are useful. And it is not something that requires a blockchain to be run, at least at the very, very early stage, right? We chose the blockchain because of the reasons that I told you earlier. We discussed this. But it's going to be interesting if all of this are happening on the same place. And we will have, probably within the next couple of years, we will have this ability of testing everything on site and on chain. So definitely we'll come up with some results.
Great. It's exciting.
Ian, any final words?
Not really. Wait and see. Let's see what's going to happen next.
Oh, definitely. Please let us know if you do all write another paper together as well. We'd love to be able to discuss that with you. And thank you so much.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. Thank you.
So, There will be in the description box, there will be a link for the paper, and also Constance has just given me they put GPT-3 into that robot with creepily realistic facial expressions, and yikes! So that will be in the description box as well. So thank you for joining us. If you liked this episode, please share, like, and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.